Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are listening in today. My name is Kim Sager, and I'm the VP of Communications and Marketing. Today is our third and final webinar for Fleet Management Awareness Month. Before I get started and I introduce our speaker, I'd like to run through some logistics. If you've been tuning in this month, you know the drill. This webinar today is recorded and will be posted on our MPMA website and YouTube channel at the end of the month. If you are registered and logged in today, you will automatically receive CEU credit. And then lastly, if you have questions during the presentation, please write them in the question box, and then we will review them as we go along or at the end. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, Ms. Connie Aaron. Connie is a program analyst for GSA's Office of Government-Wide Policy with more than 29 years of experience in federal fleet management. She previously worked for GSA Fleet, where she was responsible for overseeing fleet management centers with 6,000 federally owned and leased vehicles in the Washington, D.C. area. Connie holds the designation of Certified Federal Fleet Manager through MPMA. Connie, please take it away.
Thank you very much for that nice introduction. I'm glad everyone could be here today for NPMA's Fleet Management Awareness Month and this webinar. And it's going to be pretty laid back. If you have questions, send them to the question box, like Kim said, and she'll let me know and we'll answer them. So I'd like to have it interactive, questions coming in, and that way you do not just like reading my slides. And so interject when you can, but we do appreciate you spending time and getting trained. I think that's an important part of anyone in their career in personal property management. And, you know, a lot of fleet managers are also personal property managers. And then sometimes you're also the buildings manager. So it kind of all comes together, and we're glad that we have a focus on fleets, because we kind of always get lost down at the bottom sometimes. It's like, need a car, will drive. Wait, the car doesn't drive, what next? So I'm going to do an overview of the federal fleet and talk about policies, regulations, and data, and how we manage the fleets in the federal government. And then if you don't work for a federal agency, or you're not on a contract with a federal agency, whether you're a state fleet or a university fleet, I hope seeing how we do things will help mesh and bring things together, and see how our processes may be able to help you in your fleet program or your personal property program. So I'm going to go ahead and get started, I think. So I always like to start my presentations out just giving an overview of what is the federal fleet consisted of. And so our inventory is, you know, just not quite 650,000 vehicles. This is worldwide. It has increased a bit over the past few years. We have 21 large fleets, and we define that as a fleet that is greater than 2,000 vehicles. Miles traveled, 4.64 billion miles traveled with government vehicles worldwide. And so when you're looking to benchmark yourself against other fleets, it's operating costs always come into play. And so the federal government spends $3.6 billion to operate government vehicles worldwide. And so there's a pretty big chunk of change and a big sphere of influence. Like I said, fleets always seem to be last thing thought of in some agencies or at your organization. As long as the car's driving, nobody asks about things. But you need to emphasize your sphere of influence and how much of your operating costs operate your fleet. A lot of people are surprised to see that our fleet composition in the federal government is 64% trucks. We're all used to seeing the sedans on the road, and, you know, because we're always watching to see what they're doing in those sedans because it's a federal government vehicle. But sedans only make up 34% of the fleet. And then rounded out with buses and ambulances is less than 2%. So what makes up the federal fleet? 36% are postal service vehicles, 38% are civilian agencies, and only 26% of the federal fleet is operated by the military. And so we have 3 different sources for vehicles in the federal government. We have agencies that own their own vehicles, and 69% of the fleet is agency owned. And then there's a part of the federal agency GSA that is actually like it's a leasing company. It's just like Enterprise. They buy vehicles and lease them to other federal agencies. So 30% of the federal fleet is GSA fleet leased vehicles, and then commercial lease is less than 1%. So where is our framework for? I'm going to talk about policies and regulations, and then get into data, where we collect data in the federal government, what we use it for, and then hopefully tie it all together to see how your role as a fleet manager or fleet specialist or personal property specialist brings it all together for you to be able to help your agency complete its mission, keep the vehicles on the road, and see that role. So I'm going to start out just talking just briefly about the framework for federal fleets. So if you're a university fleet or a state fleet or a private industry fleet, you would have a different framework. For the federal fleets, our framework is regulatory. It starts with a law. There's a law that tells agencies to obtain vehicles, where to buy vehicles, how to manage the vehicles, and then from the law, different agencies write regulations. GSA is in charge of management of vehicles, overall management, so we have a regulation about management. Department of Energy and EPA govern federal vehicles and alternative fuel initiatives. So they write regulations about alternative fuels in government vehicles. And then from a law, the regulation, then we come down to what's called an advisory bulletin, and I'm going to touch more on this later. And then once you have that framework, and then the individual agency can write internal policy for their agencies. And then we have executive orders coming from the White House on the management, either the management of vehicles or some AFE initiative or energy initiative coming down that may affect motor vehicles, or there's an executive order that was issued about wearing masks on federal property, and workplace safety, and motor vehicles is part of workplace safety. So we're looking to see how all that ties in. And then there's the Office of Management and Budget, which has circulars. And the circulars give guidance to federal agencies on managing personal property, which includes fleets, motor vehicles. There's Comptroller General decision, which tells agencies can ask the General Accountability Office, did we spend this money appropriately, whether it's a question of what was spent on a vehicle or how a vehicle was used. They make interpretations of monies appropriations that have been spent. And you can search those. There's always your Office of General Counsel guidance. Really, that's who you need to become good friends with when you're a fleet manager, is get to know your General Counsel's office or the route to send messages to them so that you can find out legally where you stand. There's so many legal aspects to fleet management, whether there's a crash that occurs or there's a misuse issue where a vehicle is used improperly. So you really need to have a line to your General Counsel's office. And then we have a lot of informed decision making in the federal fleets, because you can't write a regulation or a policy or a law that specifically digs into each specific area. Like the question we get a lot, I've heard a lot over the years was, if I'm en route from point A to point B, can I stop for lunch along the way if it's my lunch hour in a government vehicle? And so that's something, it's not going to say that specifically, not in broad policy, maybe your agency specific policy, but not in the broad policy. So there's a lot of informed decision making that goes on where you look at all the different framework laws, regulations, bulletins, agency policy, and you interpret that to the specific situation going on. So these are just some links that I put up for sources of information of where to find these regulations and bulletins. GSA.gov/FMR is where you would find management regulations for personal property and motor vehicle management. There's the FAR, GSA.gov/FAR is the federal acquisition regulation. If you're a contractor operating government vehicles, then there are FAR clauses in the contract to help you make sure you're managing the vehicle properly and give the proper approvals for a contractor to use a government vehicle. I'm going to talk about this a little bit later in the presentation, but there's a lot of times that the federal travel regulations, the FTR, which is GSA.gov/FTR, gets involved. When people are on official travel and using a government vehicle for official travel. And then there's individual agency regulations and directives, which you can usually find on your agency's intranet site. But also, if you go to Google and you Google Interior Fleet Management Handbook, you'll find it. Agriculture Fleet Management Handbook. And so within your own agency, if you're trying to look to write a policy or guidance on an issue, and you want to see what other agencies have done, then you can do a Google search and find other federal fleet management handbooks from various agencies online. And you can compare to see what policies are being written at different agencies, and it will just help you make your job a little bit easier in writing your own internal directives. So the regulations that govern motor vehicle management in the federal government, there is some are still left in the Federal Property Management Regulation, which is the FPMR, and some have transitioned over to the Federal Management Regulation, the FMR. So I have them listed here on the slide. The purchase of new motor vehicles is in the FPMR. If it starts with a 101, 41 CFR 101, it's still in the old FPMR, but that one and the next one, 101-39, which is GSA Fleets Regulation, they are in the process of being rewritten and hopefully will be migrated over to the FMR in the near future. So in federal motor vehicle management, there's home to work transportation regulation. Can you drive a government vehicle home? And there's an entire law written on it that asks GSA to write a regulation. And then we also have other guidance we've issued on home to work transportation. Motor vehicle management is 102-34. So the 102 for 102-5, 102-34, 102-39, that tells me the 102, it's already been migrated to the FMR, the Federal Management Regulation. A big one, federal fleets, is the use of exchange sale, which is it's where you have a motor vehicle and you sell it and take the proceeds to help purchase the new vehicle. And so GSA Personal Property manages that regulation. So it's a special authority that's been granted for the exchange sale of personal property, which includes motor vehicles. Regulatory resources. So when I'm talking about regulatory resources, besides just the regular regulations on management, I also like to give out these to folks because they're interesting reads. The federal government is self-insured, and a lot of drivers don't realize that. And so we're covered by what's called the Federal Tort Claims Act, and that's if you're acting within the scope of your employment to accomplish your agency's mission as directed. And so government employees are protected from personal liability because of the Federal Tort Claims Act. But this is only within the United States. So I wanted to point that out. If anyone ever asks, well, you know, is the federal government insured? Well, we're self-insured. A lot of foreign countries do not recognize the U.S. government's self-insurance doctrine and will require you to obtain private insurance if you're going to operate a U.S. government vehicle in their country, including Canada, Mexico. So taking a government vehicle, U.S. government vehicle, into Canada, you would need private insurance for that. I know we have a lot of government contractors that drive or are passengers in government vehicles. So I wanted to give the insurance requirement citation. You can see that on the slide. And then for agency, contractor, and personal liability, I wanted to give more information on that, which is in the FAR. And those are two FAR citations that will help you manage contractor use of vehicles. And then I talked earlier, you can search Comptroller General decisions with the Government Accountability Office, and there's the link to do that. So, as I mentioned, the policy and regulatory framework for the federal government and using government vehicles to perform our agency's mission, the number one question that is received is official use. I mean, anyone who's seen a government vehicle, you can see it's actually written on the license plate. And so everyone says official use only. And so when you see that government plate, you know, parked at Sam's Club or Costco, and you're like, wait, that's supposed to be for official use only. And so this is how it's defined. Official use is using a motor vehicle to perform your agency's mission as authorized by your agency. It's not something that another agency can direct, like GSA writes a regulation on the management of motor vehicles, and this is GSA's definition of official use. But I want to highlight, it says as authorized by your agency. So if you wanted to stop en route from point A to point B and get lunch during your lunch break in a government vehicle, your agency has to authorize that. It's not GSA authorizing it or OMB or another agency. It's your agency. And so because the guidance is pretty generic, that's why it's important to have internal policy and regulations written so that your drivers for your agency will know what to do. There are some pretty severe penalties in the federal government for misuse of a government motor vehicle. Any incidents that are received are directed to the employing agency of the driver. And it's in federal statutes that it's a minimum 1 month suspension and up to removal from federal service if you are found to be negligent or misuse of a government vehicle. So the federal government takes this pretty seriously about using vehicles only for official use. And I talked about there's an authority to give drivers home to work authority, where they take a government vehicle from the office and they drive it at home, whether it's a law enforcement officer who has to be on call and needs permission to have the vehicle at home. Besides having a policy on official use, your agency should have a policy on incidental use. So once that law enforcement officer gets his government vehicle home, are you giving them permission to use the vehicle as needed when it's at home? And we would call that incidental use. And that's something only your agency can determine if that's permissible or not. So when you're writing directives internal to your organization, you should have a policy or guidance document on official use and incidental use. So I talked about the framework of things. We have laws, regulations, and then we have what's called bulletins. Because the laws and regulations are very, very generic, like official use, you see how generic that is. There are certain things that regulatory bulletins have been issued on that give a little bit more information. I talked about there was a regulation for home to work transportation, taking a government vehicle home at night at the end of the day. And so we actually have a bulletin, FMR B35, which gives a little bit more information about home to work transportation. And it's in all these different subject areas. So it takes the law, it takes the regulation, gives a little bit more information to help you write your internal policies. So even if you're not with the federal government and you want to see what the federal government is doing with home to work transportation or saying how to measure indirect costs, that's a little part of fleet management that kind of gets put by the wayside sometimes, is how much is it to rent a building to house motor vehicles or parking lot. So in the federal government, Bulletin B38 will tell you how we manage indirect costs and reporting that. So I talked about we have motor vehicle regulations and policies, but in the federal government, we also have travel regulations. And why would travel regulations relate to fleet management? Frequently asked question is, how many miles can I drive a government vehicle in one day? And I'm like, I don't know. How many miles can you drive a government vehicle one day? I get tired driving like 3 hours. So that's just me being a little silly. But so that's when the federal travel regulation would kick in. You know, what's the official travel order say? The travel regulation for federal employees actually states you have to use the most advantageous mode of transportation for your trip. Was that selected? So if it's $200 to fly from Norfolk to Washington, D.C., but you decide you want to drive a government vehicle because you don't like to fly, what are the costs of driving that government vehicle? And how long is it going to take me? 3.5 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, depending on traffic. And so that's when a travel regulation or a travel policy would kick in. Was the most advantageous mode of transportation selected? You know, just because a federal employee's personal preference is to drive a GOV, it may not be authorized because of the federal travel regulation. And so driver fatigue is not something that's regulated by GSA. Department of Transportation regulates driver fatigue, and I've got those links up there, especially if you're driving a commercial driver's. You need a CDL to drive your vehicle. Again, I'm talking about federal travel regulations here and how they work with, why does the federal travel regulation mention government vehicles? It defines the method transportation agency may authorize, including government vehicles. You have to take costs and other factors in consideration to make sure it's most advantageous. And then remember we talked about official use of a vehicle versus incidental use earlier. So in the federal travel regulation, if you have a government vehicle and you're on official travel, the federal travel regulation actually states what incidental use you can use the vehicle for. And so if you're on official travel, you can only use it between places of temporary lodging, when public transportation is unavailable or impractical, to restaurants, drugstores, barbershops, places of worship, cleaning establishments, and similar places necessary for the I can't say that word, sustenance, comfort, and health of the employee to foster the continued efficient performance of government business. So when you're writing your internal policies for official use and incidental use, don't forget to include a policy on using vehicles, company vehicles, government vehicles, state vehicles, while you're on official travel? And where can you take the vehicle when you're on official travel? So some other federal fleet-related regulations in the federal government. There was an executive order 13513, which tells federal employees they're not allowed to text while driving a government vehicle, and you're not allowed to text while driving a privately owned vehicle if using a government-furnished equipment. And also in the executive order is a FAR citation that encourages contractor policies be written to ban texting while driving. So this is where an executive order was written, and it reaches into government vehicle use, private vehicle use, and then also if you have contractors driving government vehicles or using government furnished equipment, telling them they can't text while they drive. Now, personal property folks would be happy to hear there's actually a general record schedule 10, which talks about which maintenance and operation records you're required to keep as a fleet manager. And so it's National Archives and Records Administration that writes these regulations for the government, and I have a little sample of it here. But it goes line for line for motor vehicles and the operation of motor vehicles, what records do you need to keep and how long you need to keep them for. So it's kind of like a pre-written file plan for you. It tells you when you can dispose of things. The link is right here to get to that for federal employees. And again, you could take what we do in the federal government and help write your own records disposition schedule for your company or for your state fleet. And just if you wanted to see what we're doing in the federal government with records keeping, their National Archives has written this policy out for us. Just a little note that the Office of Personnel Management actually regulates federal drivers. It's an HR issue, and I'm sure even if you're in a private company, there are times when HR, human resources, and fleet management match up, and that's when it comes to the management of the drivers themselves. So for federal employees, it's CFR Title 5, Part 930. You can just Google that. It'll bring it up. And it just talks about, is a medical evaluation required? What are corrective actions for misuse? What authorizations do you need to drive a government vehicle? And it's OPM that regulates that for the federal government. Environmental regulations, where do I look for help on this? And it's Department of Energy and EPA. So these great websites that will help you manage your federal fleet when it comes to environmental mandates and regulations. They have great resources for you to look at. And if you go to Department of Energy's Federal Energy Management Program page, FEMP page, not only will they help federal fleets manage their vehicles, but they also have programs outside of the federal government. They've been tasked with initiatives with states and private companies to encourage alternative fuel use and alternative energy and fuel sources for motor vehicles in general. So you can go look at the federal fleet page to see what they're recommending for federal fleets, but also navigate around their website and you will find more information with regards to other public utility fleets. They have some guidance for them. So to wrap it all up, where do I go for policy questions in my agency? I'm going to wrap up the policy stuff. Your agency fleet manager, your agency general counsel's office, agency directives and guidance documents. You need guidance documents, especially in official use, incidental use, use when traveling in a vehicle. your agency travel manager, because when it crosses the line between fleet management, a vehicle that's on official travel, it may be in your travel guidance document, the answer to the question you're looking for. And if you have contractors using government vehicles, always get to know the contracting officers that authorize the contractor to use the vehicle. There should be an open line of communication, because if there's ever a question about was the contractor authorized to use a vehicle, or the contractor was in an accident, or the contractor was a passenger in an accident, your first source would be the contracting officer. So we have policies and regulations. That's our framework in the federal government for managing motor vehicle fleets. But we're also big on data. Data. Everyone's big on data. So for years, the federal government as a whole collected data at the aggregate level for federal fleets. A few years ago, we switched gears and started collecting asset level data. So what is asset level data? Asset level data is where we collect data on each individual vehicle. So every vehicle, whether it's owned by GSA, Department of Agriculture, Department of Homeland Security, Air Force, whatever federal agency or entity, whether they own or lease a vehicle, they are putting data into one system called the Federal Automotive Statistical Tool, and they're doing it by each vehicle now. So there's 60 data elements that are grouped: vehicle attributes, vehicle ownership, special characteristics of the vehicle, operations and fuel consumption cost data, and then they have to project out acquisition, social, and cost. For 3 years, they're projecting that out. I could be wrong. But it's a streamlined agency reporting process. Agencies should have a fleet management information system. And instead of grouping all their data together by classes, like we used to just collect data for light trucks and sedans and vehicle classes, we're now doing it asset level. And so it should go from the agency's fleet management information system and get put into FAST, Federal Automotive Statistical Tool. So this has been significant in improvements in data quality and hopefully potential to shorten reporting periods, and then the expanded use of using data for each vehicle in the federal fleet. It's a better data analysis and benchmarking capabilities within an agency and government-wide. So when agencies report that data into the Federal Automotive Statistical Tool, GSA, the General Services Administration, publishes what's called the Federal Fleet Report. We used to call it that. It's now called Federal Fleet Open Data Set. But it's just inventory, acquisition cost, mileage, and fuel use data from federal motor vehicles. It's reported annually in the Federal Automotive Statistical Tool, and we call that FAST for short. And FAST, you also submit data for the Energy Policy Act, EIA, Energy Information Agency, and OMB Circular A11, which is a budget data call for federal fleets. So with the new asset level data reporting, agency motor vehicle records are passed electronically from the agency's management information system to GSA DOE's reporting system, the Federal Automotive Statistical Tool. And it's just a little graphic saying all the costs and all the mileage for each vehicle gets put into the vehicle record, and the vehicle record is uploaded into the annual motor vehicle report. What requires federal agencies to do the reporting is a regulation. It's in FMR 102-34, and it tells them that they have to report it FAST yearly, and it tells them the type of information they have to report, and that they have to have a fleet management information system to do that reporting. So if you're a university with different satellite locations, I'm curious to see if you are reporting fleet data by vehicle, or are you aggregating it by location and then sending it forward for you to do your analysis at the headquarters level? So just seeing how we're now doing it in the federal fleet, you can look at our data and see how that matches to your data. So what's really cool too about the data that's reported in FAST is there's a federal fleet inventory tool that is available. It's on a public website. You can just Google federal fleet report and it brings up a short paragraph and look for the link that says federal fleet inventory tool at the bottom of the page. And when you bring that up, it takes you to this page, which is the federal fleet open data visualization. And it has FY14 through FY19 federal fleet data sets. And when you dig into each data set, you can make reports. This is a government-wide dashboard of miles traveled, which is the sample that I gave you. But if you wanted to do any benchmarking of your fleet, whether you're a federal agency or a non-federal entity, and wanted to see what things are going, there's all these nice, on the right-hand side of the pages, filters you can use to look at miles traveled, operating costs, indirect costs, types of vehicles, domestic, foreign. If you're really good with data and matching all this together, then you can use the data found here at the Federal Fleet Open Data Visualization page and gather data on the federal fleet and benchmark it against your own fleets. So there's also other places to go for fleet data. The Federal Fleet Performance Data, which is collected in FAST, Federal Automotive Statistical Tool. This is Department of Energy's website to get federal fleet performance data. If you go to their site, you can look at AFE acquisitions, agency inventories, fuel consumption, and then they talk about their collection methodologies for getting this data. And again, if you have a new alternative fuel vehicle program in your company or your agency, and you want to see where other federal agencies are putting alternative fuel vehicles, you can go to DOE's website and you can use the information they're providing to help plan where you're going to put your alternative fuel vehicles. So having all of this data available online, whether you're in the federal government or outside the federal government, can help you plan with your fleet where to put vehicles to get maximum use of the alternative fuels. So the data, where are we using it in the federal government? We're using it to manage the fleet, or at least we hope they are. We're using it to help justify the fleet. In the federal government, there always seems to be times where they just want across the board, let's cut the federal fleet 20%, we need to cut costs, they're spending way too much on the federal fleet, but they don't have any data to say why we need to cut costs. Congress may have a new agency or a new program that they're starting, and say Department of Homeland Security has an entire new mission, and to complete that mission, they need vehicles. So you need data to justify the fleet, whether you're upsizing the fleet or downsizing the fleet, or you're right-sizing it or changing it to a different type of vehicle. The data that you collect on your fleet can be used to help justify the fleet. And so other ways we're using it is to comply with the GSA reporting requirements, or energy reporting requirements. EPA ESA 141 reports federal fleets have to report greenhouse gas emissions on vehicles and whether they're buying vehicles that have low greenhouse gas. We're populating budget scorecards, and we're populating what is called in the federal government the Strategic Sustainability Performance Plan. and any data reporting requirements for your agency is what you're using data for in the federal fleets. So hopefully AssetLevel Data will continue to help federal fleet managers to conduct more in-depth analysis on their fleet. Data government-wide and at the agency level will be more reliable, and as the data becomes better to validate and check for errors, because we're reporting by vehicle now, we can see errors more easily. Data can be used to formulate policy decisions to make agency fleets more efficient, and ultimately use asset-level data will drive smart decisions across the federal fleet. Use federal fleet data to benchmark your own fleet. The open data sets are available online, and there's, like I said, it was available from 2014 data to 2019 data, and it will enable you to be able to benchmark your own fleet and see how you're doing with federal agencies or the government as a whole. So let's tie all this together now. We have policy, we have regulations, and we have policy, and we're collecting lots of data in the federal government. And so let's tie all this together now. So the roles of the fleet manager. You're a manager, you're a supervisor, you're a communicator, you're a financial analyst, you're a vehicle technician, procurement officer, environmental specialist, vehicle disposal manager, trainer, and other duties as assigned. So there are many rules that fleet managers wear and roles that they have, many hats. So, but I want to talk more about your role as a communicator. To me, communication and fleet management is key to a successful program. Effective communication between the headquarters level to senior management down to the field level and then down to drivers is critical to a successful fleet program. Drivers, they need to know where to get the vehicle, what to do with the vehicle, what they can't do with the vehicle, what happens if they get in an accident, what if the vehicle breaks down. You know, you don't want someone who doesn't know how to get your company vehicle repaired going to some shop and getting work done on the vehicle that you find out later could have been covered by warranty at the dealership. So effective communication all the way down to the driver is key. And it's key to successfully influencing driver behavior and introducing new ideas. I remember way back in the day when natural gas, federal fleets were big on natural gas, compressed natural gas. Got my CNG pickup truck. I'm going to go down and fill it up full of natural gas. So they give you this pickup truck, but did they tell you how to get natural gas in it or where to go to get it? It's very intimidating. So I remember the little thing on the end, and you pull up and you're like, wow, that doesn't look like a gas pump because it's not. It's natural gas. Wait, I don't know how to use this. Oh my goodness, I don't know how to fill this thing up. I'm going to park this truck and not use the natural gas vehicle. I am going to use the regular fuel vehicle just because nobody showed me how to use this pump, and it scares me. And so it wasn't communicated to us how to refuel a CNG vehicle. So to influence my behavior to use the compressed natural gas vehicle, someone needed to teach me how to do it and make me more comfortable with it. And so when you're introducing new initiatives or new ideas, it's getting down to the driver. That's how you're going to influence their behavior. Just getting down to the driver and communicating, hey, this is a new thing we have going on here. Let me show you how you do it. So it's important for fleet managers to remember agency drivers are focused on their mission, not vehicle management. So the agency driver, they just want to go from point A to point B. You know, if you're an inspector for agriculture and you have to get from one plant to the next plant, and you're on a time schedule. You've got appointments made, you need to get there, and vehicle management is not in your head. You just need to get your mission done. And so as a fleet manager, we need to remember that agency drivers, they can't always go get the oil change when you tell them to get the oil change, even though we need them to get the oil change. And so just remember they have a mission, and your mission is to help them get their mission done efficiently, effectively, the best way to do it. So I have here just a few communication barriers and different priorities. If you're a headquarters fleet manager or a field level fleet manager, at the agency level, you're looking at compliance, environmental mandates. You have all these reporting requirements. You're doing replacement, life cycle cost analysis. Where's the money coming from? Remember, you got to justify your fleets, all that data you're putting into the SaaS system. So it helps, if you get the correct data into the system, it helps with replacement and life cycle cost analysis. At the headquarters level, you're developing internal agency policy on fleet, you're managing the home to work program, and you're helping to take care of agency VIPs. So agency fleet managers help people in the field, but then the field fleet manager, they're not only answering data calls from the agency fleet manager, but they've got to keep the drivers happy. They've got to maintain and keep the vehicles on the road. They have to pick up new vehicles when they're delivered to the dealerships. They have to get the license plates put on. They have to manage vehicle accidents and the drivers. They have to negotiate local agreements for fuel and maintenance, and then also other duties as assigned. So I think if you remember your role at the headquarters level versus the field level, and then your both end goal is to keep the driver on the road for their mission, and just having mutual respect for each other, and understand their point of view at whatever level you are for fleet management. So ways to communicate. Agency bureau level fleet handbooks, developing driver packets to go in the vehicle. Most agencies have an intranet site in the federal government, have training on fleet management. In the federal government, we take training on data security and emergency response, and trying to think of what else. We take a lot of this ethics. We take a lot of the same training every year. So why not develop a fleet training that's required? At GSA, they actually have a required training on personal property management, but within your organization, if you have a lot of drivers and a lot of vehicles, have required training for them every year. You could do many training sessions on vehicle pickup days. You could do broadcast emails about hot fleet topics. You could send them to the Fleet Management Awareness page before January 31st and do the word search contest that's going on. You could have fleet-specific events in headquarters or in the field, like Earth Day or Driver Safety Week. Having just a generic fleet email box for questions. And, hey, can I drive a government vehicle home tonight? I'm leaving for travel in the morning. And they don't know who to ask. Well, have a generic email box for fleet questions. And of course, the drivers are just trying to get their mission done, and they always ask at the last moment, don't they? So just doing that, having a simple email box for your company or your agency drivers to email questions to, because they just don't know. So just to wrap things up, don't forget, your most valuable resource to ask for assistance, besides your agency's general counsel's office and your agency fleet manager, are your fellow fleet managers. Your fellow fleet managers. And there's a list on GSA's website for that. Fleet managers love to share information. And so thank you for coming today. I just want to encourage you, NPMA, get certified. They have a fleet certification program. They have a national education seminar that's coming up, and we are looking for speakers for the fleet management track. So if you want to speak at on the fleet track, or you know someone who does, or a good topic, you can email that to me at connie.aaron@gsa.gov, and you can get recognized. There's a fleet management award that goes out every year for NPMA. And so there's the link on the page, on the Fleet Management Awareness page. You can nominate someone for a Fleet Management Award, whether it's a team or an individual. It would be for last year's 2020 work. So if someone in your agency has done a great job in fleet management, you can ask an NPMA member to nominate them, and please go to that website so that you can put yourself in for the Fleet Award or your team. So that's all I have today. Thank you. I appreciate your participation today.
Thank you, Connie, so much, and appreciate all the NPMA plugs just now. That was so great. There's so much that is offered for Fleet and NPMA, so be sure to check those out. There is a couple questions, but I think we can answer some of those. A comment about NPMA and fleet training and certification. That is also part of NPMA. The slides, so the webinar is recorded. Connie, I'm not sure if you're comfortable, if folks maybe email you specifically, then you could share the PowerPoint slides.
Sure, that's fine.
Feel about that? Okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
So if anybody's interested in the slides and not just the recording, Connie's email is right there on the screen in the middle, and you can get those from her. Also, just a reminder too, Connie mentioned that we do have the Fleet Word Search contest going on for a couple more days. It's on our Fleet Management Awareness Month page, where you can see lots of fleet information, and then also do the word search. It's quick and fun, and we're going to pick 10 random winners to win a Amazon gift card. So do that. You have a couple days left. I don't see any other questions coming in, Connie, so we can go ahead and wrap up and give everybody a few minutes back of their day. I hope everybody enjoyed all the webinars this month for Fleet Management Awareness Month. It's been fun, and I hope everybody's enjoyed.
Thank you. Appreciate you letting us speak today.
Of course. Thanks, Connie. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.